Welcome, everyone, to the second of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada's Philately 101 series. This is the second in our presentations on an introduction to philatelic research. We're really glad you're here, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching this on Zoom later on. And we hope that you will enjoy it. This is one of the things the RPSC is trying to do to help new collectors and collectors who want to deepen their philatelic skills to be able to do so. And this is our second series. The first one was on exhibiting. So before we start, we have a couple of customary things we'd like to do. And the first of these is our land acknowledgement. Like many other organizations in Canada, the Board of Directors of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada has chosen to acknowledge Indigenous peoples in Canada with the following statement. As a step towards reconciliation, the RPSC acknowledges that our national office in Toronto stands on the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Our national office is also covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. Furthermore, we acknowledge that Indigenous peoples did not give up the land that they had been on for thousands of years that now constitutes Canada. We also acknowledge that Europeans did not discover Canada or arrive on an uninhabited land. The RPSC acknowledges that Canada is covered by many treaties and modern lands, resources, and self-governing agreements with Indigenous people, and that the provisions of many of these arrangements remain unfulfilled. The RPSC further acknowledges that many Indigenous peoples in Canada have not had their rights fully recognized and implemented according to the United National Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The RPSC pledges to promote recognition and knowledge of Indigenous peoples in Canada and elsewhere, and their cultures through philately. We will also work through building positive relationships with Indigenous peoples in Canada. So just a commercial for our next, the final and third presentation in this next week. I don't know why that says Ron Fox. It should say Rob Fox. Rob Fox is, of course, the creator and author of Postal History Sundays, which arrive in my mailbox every morning, every Sunday morning in time for me to eat breakfast, and is a really much beloved part of my Sunday morning. So if you don't know about this, you might want to look up Rob's Postal History Sunday blog. But he is a brilliant researcher who makes remarkable connections, particularly on mail that traveled from North America to Europe and England. So I hope you'll join us for that next week. I would like also to do a commercial for the November the 9th Joint Symposium on Postal History, which is sponsored by the Postal History Society of Canada and the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. We have three streams in this Postal History Symposium, so there will be simultaneous presentations for beginning, intermediate, and expert postal history collectors. It will run roughly it will begin at 9, but should be over by 5:30. If you would like the links, you just have to go to the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada's website, rpsc.org, and they're available there for everyone. So please let us know if you have any questions. So tonight, as we said, is our second series, and we're very honored and delighted to have Harold Krische with us tonight. I know that Harold is, I would say, one of the most engaging speakers on the Zoom circuit. He's very remarkable researcher and an author, and I find his work to be interesting, even if it's not something that I necessarily collect myself. So Harold resides near Vancouver, Canada, and has been a lifelong philatelist. He's a member of numerous philatelic societies and has taken on leadership roles with many of them. His prime collecting and research interests encompass the postal history of the Japanese prisoner of war camps during World War I. Harold is presented on aspects of military postal history at the Smithsonian Postal History Symposium, led a variety of philatelic Zoom presentations, and has written articles for numerous philatelic journals. Harold highly values the promotion of collaboration among philatelic organizations and is a founding co-director of the Collaboration Crew. He credits much of his philatelic passion to the mentorship and inspiration afforded by Emil Auer and the many engaging fellow postal historians that are so open to sharing their knowledge. So Harold, we're thrilled to have you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Greg. Really appreciate the introduction and the comments. I want to start with a shout out, Greg, to your board. You've touched on a symposium coming up in November. There's this particular series. Yesterday evening, Jane Sodero led a stamp chat panel, philatelic discussions from philatelic clubs. These are all to be highly commended, and I do that for your board in terms of the vision that's represented and the promotion of developing philately further. So appreciate that significantly. Let me go to a screen share here. Thank you. I appreciate the title of this series as well, An Introduction to Philatelic Research. And I don't by any means consider myself to be an expert on philatelic research. My competency level is improving as I move along. And my intention this evening is simply to share my approach to philatelic research, how I plan for it, things I give consideration to, and certainly provide examples of those things for you as well. Prerequisite understandings for me, I've indicated on the screen there for you, but certainly what I'm sharing with you tonight, including my thinking and the approaches, they're not intended to be prescriptive. And if there's anything that you can pick up that I have come to use and found useful this evening, that'll be absolutely great. My career path has taken me through a place where I always give quite a bit of credence to things that guide and direct us, and whether that's laws, rules, regulations, edicts. And so I always start with that perspective. And I've shared a short quote here. It's not related to philately at all in terms of research, but a general statement that has helped shape my initial thinking. And I try and use these core values to develop my plan of attack when it comes to philatelic research. A couple of things help shape the framework that I have for philatelic research. One is that for me as an individual, it's really important to have what I call intentionality of purpose, a specific plan that I give consideration to. I actually spend some time sitting down and writing out what I want to accomplish and how I'm going to go about doing it. And then I give consideration to the kinds of things that are going to be valuable to support that particular process for me. And I've already shared one of those with you, but there's many others, and I'm going to share those with you this evening. There's three specific components that are part of my plan for philatelic research. In terms of setting out my plan, I start with the thinking of why research to begin with. And so these are the three elements that I come up with for myself to facilitate my own growth, my knowledge, my understanding, to facilitate greater learning in the area and to learn from others as well. And that takes me right into that second part of collaboration, of sharing learning experiences, mine, and also seeking out those of others and seeking to understand and learn from them. And I found the combination of those two things usually have me in a place that you're feeling pretty good. You feel the passion associated with the hobby, your particular focus and interests, and what you have chosen to collect. In terms of coming at the growth part, I have given some consideration of what I call engagement and purposeful engagement. What does that look like and feel like for me? I have jotted a couple of those down here. Highlighted one in particular, the notion of discussion groups. That's a type that brings the interaction that I value, the opportunity to talk to people, to question them, to share information, to dive deeper and ask more questions. And so I want to share some of what that looks like. The learning piece is huge. 3 particular elements that I go after in my plan. And they're probably not unlike what most people do. I tend to just be a little bit formal about it, to say, this is what I want to incorporate and be able to demonstrate. Now let's talk about or look at how I might facilitate doing that. I'm going to start and take you through some examples of things that I've sought out that have been really meaningful for me and shaped my growth and my understanding around philatelic research. I've sought out some particular Zoom sessions. This particular one is the German Colonies Collectors Group. It's a quarterly Zoom session. Much of the focus is well away from my specific area of interests, but there's typically 20 to 30 people online for these sessions. They run about 2.5 hours, led by Oliver Wertkel, who does a great job organizing it all. And people feel very comfortable just sharing particular aspects or items from their collection, talking about them, and then also asking questions. The dialogue is awesome because people jump in, and every single session usually will have 7, 8, 9 people contributing items, including new acquisitions that they have questions about. So it really shows you how other people approach the collecting, where they also share where they've come up with their knowledge. What are the sources that they've come up with? Where have they found them? How have they found them? And so that's a great learning piece. Something else that can be done is to set something like that up yourself. Many years ago now, I ran into a gentleman by the name of Louis Cassette. We had some common interests. We exchanged some information, had some great dialogue. And I simply said to Louis, we should be doing this formally. Can we connect via Zoom once a month and just talk about some of the items we're acquiring, some things we're seeing out there in auctions, and things that we have questions about? And Louis introduced another individual and said, hey, this fellow I know, Bill, he's out of Seattle. He's got some interesting background, multiple languages. Can we bring him into the mix? So the 3 of us have been meeting twice a month. Sometimes it's every 3 weeks for several years now. And the amount of learning just coming from that particular session that we've set up, and we now call it the Pacific Northwest Trio. But the item that I show came up probably about a month and a half ago, and I believe it was a lot from a recent Cherrystone Kugel auction. And the question was, what is that oval with the LQ in it in the top left-hand corner? Where does that come from? What does it designate? The cover has some cancels that are out of Peking in 1913. I believe it's April 1913. And of course, as it happens to be, Bill has some information and background pointing out that Netherlands, which is where this cover is being sent, was neutral going into World War I, and that there were legations that were set up in Peking, and the LQ stands for legation quarters. He gave background on that, where it stems from and its development, and then we talked about how that changed or how it was affected during World War I. A lot of information that came forward just out of that conversation and opportunity to have such. I know that Greg's already given a bit of advertisement for Rob Fox in his presentation next Tuesday. I'm going to do that in a further way. I've been following Rob for probably about 4 years with his Postal History Sunday. It's there are a lot of blogs out there and Substacks that you're now seeing. In my opinion, Rob's is outstanding. And as Greg pointed out, I don't particularly have a high level of interest in early transatlantic mail routes, rates, but the way in which Rob approaches presenting his information is as an ultimate educator in philately. He doesn't just tell you the story of the piece. He helps you understand it in depth and detail. And he tells you how he attained the information or the struggles he had getting it. So there's a lot to be learned with his approach, and you're going to appreciate his work next Tuesday. But this is, again, a Substack that I highly recommend that you consider subscribing to. Facebook offers some great opportunities, and there are some real quality sites on Facebook. Two in particular that I spend quite a bit of time on. And this is an example from, I think it was back early October, a post from Daniel McKinney on the Military Postal History Facebook page. There's about 450 members of that page. And here's a classic example of what people feel comfortable doing. They will post an item that they know a little bit about and that they have questions about. So they give information that they feel they have, and then they just come right out and ask about particulars that they're unsure of. The majority of the time, there's somebody else in the room that looks at this, whether it's the very next day or a week later, and builds the story and provides information on here's where you can go to find out more information about the markings that you see. This is a great way to facilitate learning and also to share learning. So I highly encourage your consideration of that approach as well. One of the things that you quickly discern or find as a person trying to do some philatelic research is the importance of questions and the skill set actually involved in meaningful questions, how you figure out what you should be asking. Having that willingness to ask multi-part questions and to dive even deeper. I've given you a bit of an indication on this slide in terms of some of the questions that I routinely would be asking myself about any material that I'm working with. And most often, I found it to be quite helpful, especially that first bullet, the signs that something is worth exploring. I have a lot of interests, so I want to make sure the time I'm putting in and focusing on is going to take me somewhere and have some yields. So I'm going to go through and just share some examples of things that have generated questions in the work that I've done, and then after that get into how I've started to proceed with research on those elements. Let's start with the whole process of analytics and the ability for generating questions with the analytics. So here we have a cover marked a prisoner of war mail in English, some Bermuda stamps on there. It's got a censor marking, sent airmail to Mr. E. Auer, American Aid for German War Prisoners, 16 Durstein Street, Buffalo, New York. So right off the bat, a couple of things hit me here. I was not aware of internment camps for German prisoners of war in Bermuda during World War II. There's also an association here of a particular name and what appears to be an aid society. And you've got censorship involved in the process, which kind of makes sense with a prisoner of war mail item. In isolation, there's a few questions that pop up there. But as you start running into other material that's associated, additional questions start to develop. So on the right-hand side, I've just shared a letterhead, two different kinds. And if you'll notice, the top one, American Aid for War Prisoners, does not have the word German in there, whereas the bottom one does. But you'll also notice registered under number 374, Department of State, Washington, D.C. Anytime you see something like that, that's a tip-off that there might certainly be access to additional information. An aid society obviously was requiring to be registered with the US government. This was done. We should be able to find more information by exploring that domain. So some pointers start to become apparent. Who's involved and where's this happening? You've got a street address given there. Originally, I'm thinking that must be some type of commercial address. But in 2012, when I was in Buffalo, I drove to the address, and it's a residential place that was built in the early 1920s, and that's what it looks like there on your left. And then the person that the cover was addressed to, one Emil Auer, found a picture of him in the Buffalo News in 1937. That's the lower right. He's the person on the left-hand side with the glasses. And then a 1964 picture of Emil Auer outside his residence in Tacoma, Washington, courtesy of his family. Those things are you're all able to souse those things out with a little bit of homework. I did get a picture of the residence from an online search as well. It wasn't quite as appealing as the one I took myself. Here we have a couple of other items that are associated with American aid for German war prisoners. An envelope sent in March 1941 with a very interesting prisoner of war mail label, postage free on it. One wonders, this being sent from Buffalo before the United States is involved in World War II, was this mail even supposed to be free? And then, of course, you notice that it's also sent to camp leader, Captain Oscar Scharf, Camp R in Ontario. And on the piece on the right-hand side is out of Camp Murchison from Australia, about 175 k's north of Melbourne. And questions arise now when you see more items about the scope of this particular aid group. What were the reaches? What type of aid were they providing? More and more questions start coming to the forefront. One of the things that are part of research is not just about the markings on the cover or the cancels, but who are they? Who are these people? We've already touched a little bit on Emil Auer, the recipient of this mail, but when you start taking a look at who's sending it, that really sometimes opens some doors as well. The cover on the left, Captain Dane, when I did a little bit of research on him, and that was simply a matter of Google search, plugging in his last name and throwing in Fort Stanton and Columbus, and you find out that he was the captain of one of the largest luxury liners going across the Atlantic and into the Caribbean and even down the east coast of South America in the late 1930s. The vessel was named the SS Columbus, and Dane was en route to the Caribbean when World War II broke out. And he was told to try and make his way back to Germany or to scuttle the vessel. And so he did that. In fact, he dropped the entire passenger crew was left in Havana, and he tried to make his way up the US East Coast, was being chased by a couple of British naval vessels, and decides to scuttle the boat and sink it. His crew of over 400 people are all in lifeboats, end up being picked up by the USS Tuscaloosa and taken to Ellis Island in New York. All of this information readily available online. It gets even more interesting because the United States was not involved in the war yet at this point in time, and the Atlantic was no longer an option for returning the crew back to Germany. So they were put on trains and sent to Angel Island in San Francisco. Were put up there for a while. Some managed to return across the Pacific, but the vast majority, when the US became involved in the war, were interned in Fort Stanton, New Mexico. And the camp they were in and that they helped create becomes known as the Columbus Camp. And Dane leads the prisoners in that camp. In the same respect, the cover on the right-hand side if you do a Google search on Jürgen Wattenberg, you quickly find out that he was a German U-boat commander during World War II, sunk an inordinate number of ships with his U-boat before being captured, was brought into the United States, spent obviously some time at Crossville in Tennessee. But as you read further in Wikipedia, you find out that Jürgen Wattenberg was the master of the Great Escape in the United States in World War II. He was in a camp called Pago Pago, just outside of Phoenix. And he put together an escape plan through tunnels that resulted in 25 POWs escaping. And he remained at large and was found close to the Mexican border almost a month after his escape. So you've got some really interesting personalities emerging. And now you're wondering further, what are these people specifically writing to American Aid for and about, or to Emil Auer about? And other questions come to the forefront. You continue to look at material that you run across and find with respect to American Aid. And I was surprised that I couldn't find out a lot of information about this aid society. The Google searches didn't really come up with much of anything. So this was pushing me back towards, how do I find out more about this group? Because questions beckoned. The cover that I acquired on the left, when I took a look at it, the address given on the back flap was a woman from the women's prisoner of war camp in Kingston, Jamaica, Sibylle. And she's written to Emil Auer. It's been sent via airmail, the postage paid hand stamp, prisoner of war mail. That raises some questions as well. How did this women's camp come to be? What type of aid are they getting? Who's in that camp? And then the card on the right is a fundraising card. There was an article in the GPS magazine that I had found earlier in one of my searches that talked about these cards, and there were about 4 different frankings at that point in time. I've since come up with 4 additional types of franking, but 500 of them were printed. And you'll notice again that there's reference to the permit number 374. Any fundraising efforts also had to be approved by the US State Department. So how do we dive deeper, and how do we find out more about this aid organization and everything associated with it? The archives. Given the State Department involvement, it was a natural for me then to say, let's take a look at the US archives, and started some online work to see what I could come up with. It was a bit challenging because the material that was held by the US Archives in College Park, it was not available for online viewing. So the references were short and sweet. And I did come up with Record Group 59 and Record Group 220, 2 different containers that had information pertaining to American aid for prisoners of war and German prisoners of war. If you've never worked with archives, it's a really useful thing to try at some point. And what you'll find is that when you feel like you're getting stuck, reach out to somebody at the archives, drop them an email, make a phone call. The gentleman I ended up talking to at College Park in Maryland was incredibly helpful. He ended up taking information from me and said that one of the boxes was actually in storage and not directly available. But he went and pulled the box, took a look at it, came back to me and told me that there was about 1,800 pages of information in the 2 record group boxes, containers, and that here is a bit of a breakdown on the type of things that he had seen or noted in there. So that was surprising. I wasn't expecting that much information. He shared quite a bit of info in terms of the range of material available, enough to pique my interest and decide at some point in time when I'm close to Washington, I'm going to get there and I'm going to take a look at this material. And the amount of information that became relevant and allows me to tell a story about the postal history of American aid was enhanced incredibly by this particular archive search. The stack that you saw there was part of the 800 pages of photocopies that I took while I was there. And I want to just share with you some of those photocopies and the information that I was able to acquire. Here again, this was a report from May of 1941. The Aid Association had to provide a monthly report to the State Department indicating what they were sending out and to who and where. They had to give an approximate dollar value. So this is just part of a sheet. You can see that this relates to shipments being made to the Jamaica camps. Puzzling when you start to look at it, 24 parcels to the camp leader Von Witte, and it included 35 men's suits. Not exactly the type of aid support I was expecting to see. I later found out in some further pages that these suits were being provided to the camp orchestra so that when they played, they looked sharp and they presented in Kingston as well. You also notice Hannah Ittman, women's camp leader, and there's 6 parcels with women and children dresses, baby items, toys, shoes, and hats. This was a common type of donation. The report for June and July was very similar. In fact, it also showed that there were many cookies and chocolates being sent for the kids. This was a letter that was also in the file. You'll notice on some of these items, there are declassification hand stamps in the top left-hand corner. There were some items in this file that remained classified by the US government into the early 1980s, and in fact, 2 items into the 1990s because of their sensitivity, political sensitivity. This particular letter, I didn't recognize the significance of it originally. I'm glad I decided to take a photocopy of it. But it's a letter from McCoy, who ran one of the largest internment camps in the United States in World War II out of Bismarck, North Dakota. It was called Fort Lincoln. This was a camp that was set up by the US Department of Justice, Immigration and Naturalization, different from the camps that were set up from the US Army and military. The interesting aspect of this particular letter is that it is a listing of materials contained in 8 packages that were sent to Emil Auer. And when you look at them, most of them are either built, created, hand-carved toys, often related to Christmas, especially with the closing line in the letter, and quantities and prices associated with them. In further correspondence, I found out that Emil Auer would sell these items in Buffalo, New York, and return the proceeds to McCoy. McCoy would use the proceeds to buy more equipment for the workshop in the camp so that the POWs had something to spend their time on meaningfully and could create items that could be sold. I also found in another letter that Emil Auer had provided about $3,000 towards purchase of woodworking equipment that originally set up this particular workshop. Here's some of the more sensitive items that were also contained in these files. These are items that would have been shared. This one from the FBI was shared with the State Department to keep them in the loop. A very interesting document, and it involves the highest level of the FBI. The top request comes from Edgar J. Hoover, who is saying, hey, I'd like some more information on this Emil Auer character related to internal security and potential denaturalization proceedings. So he wants to be updated, and it's sent off to the FBI director in Buffalo, New York. His response is shown at the bottom of the form a couple of days later. And it's interesting that he said, no decision has been reached as yet concerning filing of petition for denaturalization of Auer, since outcome of the proceedings are doubtful if Auer fought the proceedings. Advises that Auer has considerable proof of loyalty and that he was instrumental in the breakup of the German-American Bund in Buffalo, and since numerous public officials and citizens of Buffalo will vouch for the subject's loyalty. So that really sheds some light on the behind the scenes political aspects that were going on and impacting Emil Auer and this aid society. You can probably imagine that too with the name of the aid society originally for German prisoners, German war prisoners, and understand why the German ended up being dropped right after Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. This is postal related and was also contained in one of the files in the U.S. Archives. And it is the official receipt of a registered letter that was sent from the President's War Relief Board to Emil Auer, telling him that they were withdrawing the permit, revoking the permit for his aid organization. And you'll see that the date down there, July 26, 1943, is when Emil Auer received this registered mail, and the date upon which he enters the signature closes the operations formally of that aid society. Other places that are useful for getting information, I'm going to jump into newspaper searches here. Two sites that I've found very valuable for me. The first one is simply the site called Chronicling America. It's part of the Library of Congress in the United States, and they have quite an impressive file on digitalization of newspapers nationwide. The number of times that I've been able to find useful references for anything I've looked into using this site, it's countless already at this point in time for me. And then the site on the right is for the state of California. That's the California Digital Newspaper Collection. They have done an incredible job with that, and I've had the pleasure of using that site several times. Very helpful, very comprehensive, and you're able to take snapshots and downloads of information that becomes quite useful to explaining what's going on with a particular cover or the circumstances associated with a cover. So those are two that I'd point out to you as being useful to me. And a third one underscores the importance of asking questions. I wasn't familiar with this particular site at all, Fulton. And this came about only because I decided to reach out to the librarian in Buffalo, New York, trying to get some more newspaper articles that might relate to the demise of American aid. And the librarian asked me flat out, Harold, have you looked at Fulton? And I said, please help me. What is Fulton? And so she explained to me what Fulton is about, that the focus is a little bit more on the New England area and some of the Canadian Eastern provinces. But she started talking about over 50 million newspaper pages on file, over 75 other million documents on file. And sure enough, when I started to use this as a resource, I was picking up on other things that I didn't get from the Library of Congress website. So look for alternate sources, explore, check them out, and most importantly, ask the questions, because this particular librarian in Buffalo, New York was extremely helpful and pointed me in some very useful directions. Sometimes I think we have this propensity to look elsewhere to help us with research. And what I'd like to do now is to also remind us, look at your own material carefully. Look at the accumulation of material that you have. Give credence to things like a census. And I had a census going for quite some time on mail associated with American aid for war prisoners. I had it broken down by country as well, but I never really quantified it. And once I quantified it, even in a simple, spreadsheet such as this, it allowed me to ask some different questions. It helped me understand further elements of scarcity and also to explain why. So I simply decided to go by year initially. So 1940, took it down to 1945, 46, the prime war years. And then incoming mail, I noticed incoming mail had different address points. So I listed all three. So the combination first, just those addressed to Emil Auer, those that were addressed to American Aid, and those that were addressed to both. I wanted some information on numbers. So here's the total number of outgoing mail from 16 Durstein Street and the total number of incoming mail. And you'll notice right away that there's quite a strong imbalance here. Only 5 outgoing items, 128 coming in. The 7 in brackets simply indicates mail that was undated, and I couldn't pin it down to a particular year. But some questions start to emerge around that. Where the mail's coming from. So I listed, this is pertaining again to Canadian POW mail for World War II. So I've indicated each of the camps or government agencies that the mail came from. And that's kind of helpful for analysis. And then what kinds of stationery were being used. Oops, sorry about that. I did this for Canada and then also did the same for Jamaica. And you'll notice strong correlations between the two charts. A lot of the mail starts to appear in 1941, peaks in 1942, and starts to fade out in 1943, which makes sense because we now know that the US government shut it down in July of 1943. Outgoing mail, again, quite scarce. Incoming mail, much more prevalent. Breakdown between the different stationery groups, somewhat similar to what we saw for Canada as well. So the analytics here are going to be helpful for me as I complete further analysis. Highly recommend you at some point doing a census, playing with the census. I think you'll find that very useful. Now, I've been dealing with the plan as it relates to the learning piece, trying to support my learning and growth. I'm going to shift a little bit now to the plan as it relates to collaboration in research. And I stress that because whenever I collaborate with others, that really tends to fuel my passion. I get more excited about Philately, and that feels good. So here are some directions that I came up with that I wanted to really go at to try and engage myself with others in a process of sharing learning, sharing what I understand, but also being able to take in the learning of others. I'm going to try and touch on some examples of most of these, going to delve into a bit of detail on a few of them, again, giving you examples. So let's take a look at a couple of these. I'm going to start with simply the importance of having the willingness and capacity and courage sometimes just to reach out and ask questions. Even to people that you don't know, take those risks. They'll more likely than not bring you back great information. This would be a classic example. I picked up the book shown on the right that's written by Horst Augustinovich many years ago. It was on censorship and Bermuda's role in World War II and the transition of mails. In that book, I noticed that he had a couple of illustrations. There's a lot of postal history in here, so that's why the book attracted me as well. But I noticed he had illustrations of 3 cards and covers that were mailed from Bermuda to Emil Auer or American Aid. And I had the cover that I showed you earlier from Bermuda was sent to Emil Auer by a woman by the name of Ruth Ellen Buchler. And I decided that I should reach out to Horst because he lives in Bermuda, in St. George's, and ask him if he knew anything about a woman's camp in Bermuda or anything about this particular individual. I gave him some information that I had acquired and knew. And within a week, he got back to me. And gave me way more than I expected or anticipated. He even sent me the document you see in behind here, the picture of Ruth Ellen. This is a photocopy of the original arrest before she was taken into the internment area. She was taken off a Spanish ship that was brought into St. George's. And the concern was that she may have been a Nazi spy. So the importance of asking questions and reaching out, incredible what you sometimes get back, way beyond what you might anticipate. One other thing that I want to underscore is philatelic research sometimes requires a couple of the P words, perseverance being one, patience certainly being another. This is an example from my Japanese World War I POW mail collection, a piece that I picked up simply because I love the messiness of it and the variety of different components and aspects to it originally. It was described in a European auction as being a World War I related cover, going from Tsingtao in Qiachao, China, to San Francisco and being redirected to Goldfield, Nevada. And when I started to take a closer look at this, in particular, paid some attention to the myriad of markings and cancellations, I noted something that at first caused some consternation. There's a Goldfield, Nevada. So obviously this cover got to San Francisco, and Mr. Carl Wiedemann was no longer at the hotel. Somebody's obviously had some information that he had gone to Goldfield, Nevada, penned that in, and it was directed that way. The cover arrived in Goldfield March 3rd, 1914. And then found another strike on the back that was March 12th, 1914. And that kind of worked for me because my thinking was, okay, they kept the envelope for a while pending the ability to deliver, and maybe they couldn't connect with him in Goldfield. But then I also noticed that there's a cancel I hadn't paid much attention to when I first purchased the item. There's another Goldfield machine strike that is partially obscured by the wax seal. I flipped it around for you here on the left side, and I used postmark reveal to enhance this a little further. But even with the naked eye, you can see July. There appear with postmark reveal, it appeared that there's a 1 in here as July 1st. And it's also 1914. That becomes a little bit more evident using postmark reveal. And then I noticed that the Tsingtao, Qiachao cancel on the reverse was actually May 26th, 1914, in between the dates of the Goldfield strike. And now I'm questioning, did this item actually cross the Pacific 4 times? I need to dive deeper into this and find out more. And again, started with the process of asking others for their perspective and insight, writing an article about it and asking questions in the article. I also ended up reaching out to an expert who was in Germany and used to authenticate items and issue certificates. He had retired, and I had purchased an item from him previously. So I shared this with him and asked him some questions as well. His response was fabulous. So collaboration is an awesome way to carry out research. He had some insights and some connections to documents that I didn't have access to, and was able to substantiate some of my beliefs and to do it with clarity. Now, mind you, there's a challenge of the German language that had to be used, and interpretation, translation, but that's all possible with Google Translate as well. So in terms of collaboration, the Facebook page was helpful in terms of a posting with questions. The letter sent to Rolf Haspel was very rich in terms of feedback. I also involved Jerry Miller, who's a person that I knew a little bit and had some expertise with Chinese mail, and his thinking was along my lines. So that reinforced that I was on the right track. And the article that I wrote for the Military Postal History Society on this piece also generated feedback from two other people that substantiated my thinking about the item. Again, collaboration, huge. I decided to try and push a little further on the item still. The auxiliary marking on the front of the item, that there was a hand stamp that says advertised. And I had read something before many years ago indicating that if an item couldn't be delivered, a post office would provide the hand stamp advertised on the cover, and then it would be posted often in the local newspaper for a period of a week or two, indicating this item is available at the post office for pickup, and they usually provided the name of the person it was addressed to. I started off doing the search of California newspapers because I was familiar with that digital site that I shared with you earlier. Spent quite a bit of time and could not find anything in the two San Francisco newspapers of the time. I then shifted to Goldfield, Nevada, but unfortunately, none of their newspapers were available online, and I wasn't sure quite how to proceed. So I took a bit of a risk and sent an email to the Central Nevada Historical Society. They put me in touch with the museum, and a lady there sends me an email saying, absolutely, we have those early newspapers. How can I help you? So I explained, sent the images of that cover, and gave the dates, March 3rd, March 12th, and then the July 1st date, and asked if she could check newspapers maybe a week or two after those dates for me. But a week went by, and she sends me the scans of a newspaper saying, I found it for you, Harold. And in the July 4th, 1914 Goldfield News, an 8-page publication, on page 8, third column, the bottom, advertised letters, and it explains the following is a list of unclaimed letters remaining in Goldfield Post Office up to and including the week ending July 1st. You go down the list, Herr Karl Wiedemann. There it is. So I'm able to now confirm this was, through a couple of other steps as well, confirm that this actually was in Goldfield, Nevada on two separate occasions, was held there, was advertised post, was unclaimed, and then sent for return to Kiachao, China. The problem, of course, is when it was sent back to China at this point, it was later in 1914, World War I had broken out, and the mail could no longer be delivered appropriately. Later, ended up being sent through the Japanese military mail system to the Nagoya prisoner of war camp and was delivered. Here's another one of those items that just raises so many questions, and sometimes you're not even sure where to start. This particular piece brought some confusion because you've got an official hand stamp across the top that reads zurück or returned. When mail is returned, you often will have an indication of where it's being returned to, as the red crayon marking provides on the left here. The 112 blue pencil crayon is December 1st, a date, and a little bit of research told me that this is associated with the Marine Post Bureau located in Berlin. Sorry about that. Pop that. Oops, we're going back here. I want to. There we are. What I ended up finding out here was that mail that was associated with the German Navy, when it was being mailed, it was often facilitated through the Marine Post Bureau headquarters, which was located in Berlin, Germany. It was held there. This item was mailed in Bremen on November 7th, which was actually it's ironic, this is actually the day in which the German entity in China surrendered to the Japanese and the British. And this item was sent by a sister to her brother, who was part of the Sea Battalion stationed there. And when you see the back of this item, she's just full of anxiety, trying to find out what's happening to him, what's wrong with him, if he's okay, has he been captured, can he please write as soon as possible? And so there's definitely anxiety associated with the sending of the piece. The piece was held in Berlin pending a better understanding of the ability to deliver it. And on December 1st, almost, well, 3 weeks later, more than 3 weeks later, it was decided that it should really be returned to Johanna. It however, appears to have been delivered, because you have a strike up here, February 13th, 1915, of the Marugami POW camp in Japan, which is where Herman Clausen was actually taken. So this item did get to him many months later. But how do we piece this together? If this was returned, what was happening? Again, a similar process. I reached out for some other thoughts and ideas. A Facebook posting was very useful, especially when it came to the language in script up here, Asakusa camp, and the manuscript redirectional markings at the bottom. So again, just reaching out, series of questions, very helpful in terms of directing me to other places where I can find more information and substantiate what actually happened. The feeling by 4 different people was that this item was returned to Johanna, and that she ended up putting it in an enclosure and sending it to London, England for redirection. The Bureau, the Information Bureau for Prisoners of War in London, had advertised that they were trying to facilitate connections of mail, and Johanna decided she was going to go that route to try and make this connection. Another aspect of collaboration, earlier I had shared with you what I put together as my census for American aid items. I then decided to see what else is out there, what's been done by others, and was able to run across the Encyclopedia of Jamaican Philately, Volume 9 on military mails, an item put together by Paul Fairmont and Ray Murphy. And I contacted Paul Fairmont, and we exchanged some information. I sent him my census. It turns out the census that he had going didn't have 85% of what I had in my census. So we combined the censuses and then evaluated them and decided that they could be expanded further. And Paul's done an amazing job with this census in terms of the depth of information that's contained herein. Once the census was revised and revamped, we added several different layers to it. Paul did a complete breakout based on markings, including a vast array of auxiliary markings seen on this mail. And those are all itemized and identified and broken out. The color coding is very useful on a number of respects as well. There's now, I believe, close to 500 entries in this particular census, incredibly comprehensive, and it's resulted in the identification of several previously unknown varieties of POW stationery that was being used out of the Jamaican camps, all of which comes about because of the collaboration and putting the 2 censuses together. A significant part of collaboration is sharing your learning. If you get to a place where you've done some of the research, you're putting it all together, write it up, put it out there. And whether it's in a newsletter, a local stamp club, an article in the Collectors Club periodical, a book or a monograph, put your learning out there. And it's okay to do this, even if you think that there's still more to add. There's always going to be new information out there. And I know quite a few colleagues of mine who continue to work on developing a much more comprehensive story. I'm finding that my story becomes more comprehensive just by putting stuff out there than it ever would if I waited longer. So that would be my advice too, is share your learning, take advantage of the collaboration that comes from it. And I have been amazed at the learning that has come back my way because of doing this. It's always good to get feedback too that tells you you're on the right track and that the stuff you're doing is being valued. So the monograph on American aid that I put out last year, a lot of information that came back to me from people who looked at it and read it. And it includes positive feedback and comments. So from when a person like Gary Lowe comes out and says, hey, the first thing I always turn to is the reference section, yours is refreshingly thorough for a monograph. That again feels good and fuels my passion that I'm on the right track. A monograph's a little bit more thorough, it's in depth, it should represent greater research, and I'm providing enough information that will be useful for others. Taking it a step further, something that I think we would benefit from in Philately is getting our philatelic information out beyond the philatelic world. And I was extremely pleased. This is Suzanne Frances Brown's a lady that I became aware of several years ago. She's not a philatelist at all. She's a researcher, a historian. She is actually was the curator of the museum in Kingston, Jamaica for a while, and has written several books. And this particular one on the World War II POW camps in Jamaica is outstanding and was really helpful for me. But what I really valued is when Suzanne Frances Brown reached out to me to say, hey, I learned some stuff from postal history that you've shared in terms of contents of letters, explanations of what POWs were experiencing, the process of communication, insights to the interaction between women and men in the camps. And she acknowledged that on a LinkedIn post that she put out. That brought even more questions my way. And a very positive experience, certainly for me again, all coming about simply because of the willingness to put information out there and share it. The sharing process, sometimes you don't anticipate some of the things that happen, but again, opportunity came my way. I had done a presentation for the APS Stamp Chats number of years, well, December 14th, 1920 or 2021. And they post these things on YouTube. And a couple of years later, a lady by the name of Erica Berg was doing some research on the genealogy of her family, the Japanese side. And so she just did some searches and came up with, she knew her grandfather was in the Nagoya prisoner of war camp. And she found this presentation, watched it, and noticed that I talked about several Christmas POW cards from the Nagoya camp. So she reached out to me, asking me what I knew about the camp and if I knew anything about a guy by the name of Ludolf Jansen, who happened to be her grandfather. And the traditional genealogical research on him and his development and family in Japan was really hard for her to track down. As it turns out, I went back into my collection. I ended up finding, I believe it was ultimately ended up being 6 pieces of correspondence associated with, written by Ludolf Jansen, and shared those with Erica. Erica, the postcard shown in the top left here, Erica said she actually broke into tears reading it because it was the very first time that she'd ever seen the handwriting of her grandfather. Her grandfather decided to remain in Japan after the war and got married to a Japanese lady and lived there. And that side of her family was not well known or understood at all. And so she was trying to enhance that. The information I shared with her raised a number of questions for her. who's this Landgraf person in Tokyo that he's corresponding with? And I was able to help her with some of that as well. So she was extremely appreciative of the role that Philately was able to bring to her genealogical search, shares this, and within a short period of time, I now have a genealogical group coming back to me, asking me for some more insights on how postal history could be helpful. I then went back to Erica to say, this is kind of an interesting piece. Do you want to co-author a short article with me on it? I'd like you to be the key person writing it, but let me support all of the philatelic entities of it. And we'll see if we can get it published, maybe in the genealogical domain somewhere, but also in the postal history domain. And that's what happened. So on the right-hand side there, you've got the article, we called it Philately Supporting Genealogy. The German postal specialist ran it. And I believe it was about a 7 page article, if I remember correctly. Erica had some great photographs from the family to support it. I had some illustrations from the postal history side, and it ended up being a very positive overall experience for both of us. Another example of collaboration beckoning, this particular piece here was put forward by Andrew Brockett on a Facebook page. And he had some questions about it. This is not my area of expertise at all, but I was able to be helpful because I have resource books on the APO offices and numbers where they were located. And right away, I was able to take a look at this and recognize that this was simply probably just a misread and shouldn't be Harlow at all. It's actually probably Harborcraft. And so that was helpful for Andrew. But then I also noticed that this was being written to Ernest Polig, and he was obviously involved with the US Army, but it was also being sent from the Murchison POW camp in Australia. And the name that you don't see is just off the picture here. It was his brother, Gustav Polig. So you've got brothers on two sides of the war writing to each other. And my comment to Andrew Brockett was, I think you and I should be doing an article on this. So we divvied up some responsibilities, and within a couple of days, Andrew sends me this picture that he's acquired from Australian archives from the Murchison camp. And the picture listed all of the people's names. The person on the bottom right here is Gustav Polig. So we now have a picture, and we were ripe for further research. I just simply did a search of Gustav Polig's name. His obituary popped up, and in the obituary was a list of several family names, including a daughter. And I just reached out to her on LinkedIn. She's living in Portugal, and she was absolutely thrilled to receive scans of the item, and then put me in touch with the daughter of Ernst Polig, who lives in Minnesota. And all of a sudden she says, hey, this is awesome. I can share our family history with you and our archives. So we end up getting photographs here. The one on the left is the two correspondents on that letter sheet, the Polig brothers in Darmstadt, Germany, 1919. Here is their family reunion once they finally got to get together again in, I believe it was 1954 in North Dakota. And there's Ernst Polig when he was stationed down in Florida on the far right-hand side. So incredible background emerging to the story, and what was happening and transpiring in terms of why they were on two different sides all became clear just through research connecting with the family. And then the eureka moment simply gets better still, because doing a little bit more research, Gustav Polig was the author of an article in the American Philatelist in September of 2002. Turns out that he was a fairly well-respected postal historian specializing in POW mail. His collection was sold through a major German auction house in believe it was 2005 or 2006. And it turns out that he had also corresponded with Emil Auer from American Aid. What an incredible coincidence that happened to be. He commented that he had received aid parcels from American Aid and shared that information in one of his other writings as well. So the connections that are facilitated by reaching out and doing a bit of a deeper dive, it's sometimes amazing what comes your way. I then want to take it to a bit of a different level, and that is research not about postal history items that I have in my collection, but research on matters related to philately and enhancing philately further. And fairly recently, within the past year, I've become involved and taken on a bit of a leadership role with a group called Collaboration Crew. And as the title says at the bottom, we're about sharing, learning, and growing philately together. But part of that involves research. What are people doing that's working well? What does that look like, feel like, walk like, talk like? And how do we do a better job of sharing those success points with other people in philately? So the key questions that emerged for myself and a number of people involved in Collaboration Crew are shown there. And there's many others as well. That's just an example of some of the main ones that got ourselves going. And this is really fruitful conversation. And one of the first steps that we took is, let's start formalizing this a little bit so we can give people examples of the impact it can have. And I approached the organizational group of Pipex, Pipex 2024, probably about a year ago now, and said, can I work with the 5 convening societies who are going to be attending Pipex and structure some joint sessions between them? So yes, they can still do their own thing at the exhibition, but can we work together on some things? We ended up collaboratively designing 2 sessions that ended up going extremely well. Like I was part of those sessions, really enjoyed what I was seeing and doing. But the feedback that we ended up getting underscored the importance of pushing this kind of research about what's successful, what should we be giving consideration to. I'm going to share with you just what hammered this home was an email that James Buckner sent me. He's the president of the Society for Czechoslovak Philately. He was present at Pipex in Oregon. And he sent me a thank you email that included this statement, that based on his experience, he thinks every major philatelic show should find some way of having the convening societies working together to talk about the challenges they're facing and how they're going about it, what's working for them. So this reinforced that this whole collaborative approach and doing some research and then facilitating further collaboration is quite important in philately as well. So that rounds out the last piece of my plan and certainly helps fuel my passion even further on a philatelic level. Things I've learned, I've touched on several of them already. I just wanted to share those as a bit of a wrap up here. For me, it's having a plan and then reevaluating it, assessing it, tweaking it, what's missing, enhancing it further. Sharing the benefits that you're getting out of such a plan. And that's why when Greg asked if I would do this session, I was delighted to step forward immediately. And to also let people know about the skill sets that you can enhance and develop further once you start working effectively with other philatelists and also people outside of philately. That collaboration piece just being so important, and then sharing your learning and doing it formally. That engagement, the active engagement, as I've called it here, boy, does that fuel your passion. And when you're doing that, I don't think it feels better. So hopefully sharing my approach to philatelic research and my thinking and some of the things I've done along the way to enhance my knowledge and my growth in this area might be meaningful and resonate with you as well. Greg, I'm certainly, if we have time still, certainly able to answer any questions at this point.
Terrific. Well, we don't have any questions in the chat. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask, or are you? I know I got a ton of information out of this, and as we said last week, this kind of research is multiple rabbit holes at multiple times that all lead towards exciting conclusions and you in new directions. And I think that really came across very clearly in your presentation, Harold. So good. All right. Well, thank you, Harold, for doing this for us. It's awesome. A lot of thumbs up and happy listeners. So thanks for that. And I would suggest that if you're interested in working collaboratively with members of the Philatelic community, you check out the Collaboration Crew's Facebook page, or you check out collaborationcrew.org. I think I'm correct about that, right?
Correct.
Which is our website, and get involved, because this kind of thing can only help to make our philatelic world a brighter and happier place and more successful. So just a reminder that next week at the same time with the same link, we'll welcome Rob Fox, and we look forward to seeing you then. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Good night, Harold.